Well, welcome everyone. I want to first share with you what this workshop is and what it isn't. The first thing is it isn't a grant management seminar. The grant management seminar is found on the Rotary Learning Center. And we've had a number of questions about what does qualification mean? And so let me just briefly touch on that. So this year at President-elect training, there was no grant management seminar because of the way it was run. Usually in person, we've had that. The PE automatically qualifies for taking the grant management seminar, as well as they generally sign the memo of understanding or MOU and the financial management plan, the FMP. That did not happen. So this year I have made available to all the presidents-elect a number of times a copy of the MOU that needs to be signed and returned to Hal Kibbe, our stewardship chair, as well as the FMP, or the financial management plan, which needs to be signed and returned to Hal Kibbe as well. The PE then needs to go to the Rotary Learning Center and take the grant management seminar. If it's a president-elect who is in the past taken the grant management seminar in person and they communicate with me, I have allowed them to take the abbreviated overview version, but they need to communicate with me first, and so we can communicate about that. Beyond that, to qualify your club, those signed documents, as well as the PE taking the grant management seminar, to qualify for district grants, the grant writer or the grant collaborator needs to take the district grant workshop. And we're doing that because there are so many people have been struggling with district grants that we want to make it as simple as possible for clubs to do that. For a club to write a global grant, 2 people need to take the grant management seminar. I've seen a number of names on here of people who have written global grants and have taken the grant seminar in the past. If you communicate with me, then you can take just the overview, which is a shortened version on the Rotary Learning Center. We're trying to make it as easy as possible for clubs to be qualified. That being said, clubs need to be qualified by July 1st in order to have their district grant application reviewed. We have spent a lot of time reviewing applications when clubs are not qualified to no avail. So we're not going to spend that time reviewing district grants until clubs are qualified. So let's go on to the
Tim,
next.
excuse me, may I interrupt you right there? Someone
Sure.
in our audience this morning had a question about where could they find those documents that you're talking about?
Those documents are all available on DACDB. If you click on district grant icon, on the page that opens up, you will find links to those documents. Or you can send me an email and I'll send you the link to those documents. So the date for qualification is whenever you do it. If you want to have your district grant application reviewed, it needs to be done by July 1st. If it's not done by July 1st, we won't review your application until you are qualified. And you have until October 15th to get qualified. But your grant has to be complete also by October 15th. So by putting it off, you may run out of time to be qualified and have your grant application completed. So there'll be more on that in the district grant workshop. But I wanted to touch on it because we've had questions on that here. Any other questions, Lee? Okay, next slide, please. So I'd like to get a sense for who's in this group. So Leanne's going to run a poll. So there's 3 questions, 2 questions.
To do, throw the class.
A man more misunderstood.
Now, James, you can't throw the wool over my eyes. You may be able to calm the old man, but I know.
Excuse me, everybody. A couple of you are not muted yet, so if you would find the little microphone icon and mute yourself, I would appreciate it. And Tim, you were right. There's 3 questions. How long have you been in Rotary? How would you rate your understanding about global grant process, and have you written a grant?
Wonderful. So shall we end the poll and then share it with the group? So you can see that we have a, a cross section of Rotarians, which is wonderful. A little bit later in this session, I'll be asking those who have experience to share a little bit of that experience with everyone. And then you can see that we have a few people who have actually written global grants. That's awesome. I noticed a few in the participant panel that I know have written grants, and we'll be calling on your expertise as well. Okay. I wanted to give you, first of all, a little bit of background. Some of you already know that there have been changes to the World Fund. So I wanted to share some of that background with you as the reasons that Rotary has made those changes. So I've downloaded some information off the Rotary International website, and I'm just going to share that with you. The Global Grants Program has been a tremendous success since it launched in 2013 and 14. So those of you who have been in Rotary for a while understand that the grant program changed a few years ago. And it's been a real success. The Rotary Foundation awarded 886 global grants worth $47 million in that first year. But since then, in 2019 and 20, the number of global grants has increased to 1,359 worth $95 million. While global grant funding increased by more than 100%, the contributions in the annual fund have failed to keep up. And that's what this chart is about. You can see that the yellow are the annual fund contributions. They peaked about 2016-17, and since then have been in decline, while the need for global grants has been increasing. Also, in this past year, due to COVID-19, the Rotary Foundation has awarded $32 million in disaster response grants. And this district received a COVID disaster response grant, as well as 2 fire relief, disaster relief grants. And a lot of that money came right out of the World Fund. The amount available to the World Fund for global grants each year depends primarily on annual fund contributions. Now, I sent out an email to everyone last week, I believe it was, or maybe the week before, on my interpretation of why the global grant annual fund is reducing. And from my perspective, it's because of membership. Membership in this district has been declining, and membership in the North America has been declining. In fact, I called Rotary International to find out what the average contribution in North America to the annual fund was, and it was about $115, if I remember correctly. And so when you take 45,000 Rotarians approximately who have left Rotary in the last 10 or 15 years, that's a loss of about $45 million to the annual fund. So you can see how membership really plays into this loss. This year, the Rotary Foundation implemented several cost-saving measures in an effort to increase the funding available to global grants. The trustees and the RI board also transferred $15 million from the foundation's operating reserves and the RI's budget surplus to the World Fund. In total, nearly $20 million in additional funding has been made available this year. Unfortunately, it's still not enough to meet demand. there's an expected shortfall this year and in years to come unless we can increase our annual fund giving. So what I'm going to do now is go into those changes that have been made. So just a quick refresher for those that are new to Rotary. When you donate money to the Rotary Foundation annual fund, and it's also called the share fund, sometimes that's confusing to people. When you make that donation, 50% of those dollars come back to us in the form of district designated funds, and 50% of that goes to the World Fund. So our money donation is split. Half comes back, half goes to the World Fund. When you write a district grant, those monies come out of district designated funds. When you write a global grant, the matching dollars come out of district designated funds as well as the World Fund. So I'm not going to go into that in any more depth, but just understand that there will be changes to that. So Lee, could we go on? So the first decision is that district designated contributions to the polio will be matched at 50%. So let me explain that. We have normally district designated funds left over on the global grant side each year. The district governor, along with the District Rotary Foundation Committee Chair, which is myself, can make a determination to take some of those unused district designated funds and make a contribution to Polio Plus above what our members have made. In the last couple of years, the Rotary Foundation has matched that DDF contribution 100%. And then those total dollars have been matched by the Gates Foundation 2-to-1. So it's a pretty significant contribution. Rotary Foundation will continue to match those funds if we continue to do that in the future, but they will be matched at 50%. So a $100 contribution would be matched with $50 and then 2-to-1 with the Gates Foundation. So this past year, District Governor Cindy, or this current year, District Governor Cindy and myself decided to donate $10,000 of our global grant DDF to polio, which turns into a fairly significant match. So $10,000 becomes $20,000, which is matched 2-to-1 by the Gates Foundation. So it's a pretty good deal. The second decision was to reduce the World Fund match from 100% to 80%. And the district has taken some steps to help mitigate that for clubs. The next decision was the 5% of the current annual fund share contributions that will be taken equally out of district designated funds to help with operating expenses. And I'll explain that a little more. And then there's also a feature that will take out some DDF from rolling over beyond 5 years. And the reason that this has been done is that there's countries in the world that hoard DDF. Without naming names, there's one country that the outgoing district governor is praised if they have more DDF than they started with. And that's not the purpose for our donations to the Rotary Foundation. So I'll explain this further. So Leanne, can we go to the next slide? So you can see that a $20,000 donation to Polio Plus next year will be matched with $10,000, which is $30,000, and then a 2-to-1 match from the Gates Foundation makes that $90,000. So it's still a fairly significant contribution. Next slide, please. So if you make a $20,000 cash contribution, that's not true. If there's a DDF, because only DDF is matched, The World Fund match is $16,000 for a $36,000 global grant. However, what we've done in this district in April when we met, we wanted to make this reduction minimal impact on clubs. So we did two things. We raised our match, our DDF match to club cash. We raised the maximum to $30,000 from $25,000. And we also changed it from a 1.5 match to 1 to 2 to 1. So a $10,000 cash contribution by a club would be matched $20,000. So that's $30,000, which we matched at 80%, which mitigates the 80% drop. And we feel that for the number of global grants that we're writing in our district, that will we have enough DDF to cover that. Plus, that will also eliminate the 5-year carryover issue, which I'll explain here in a minute. Okay. So currently, a $100 donation to the annual fund, $50, a full half comes back to the district. $45,000 goes to the World Fund and $5 goes to operating expenses. After July 1st, that $100 contribution, that $5 will be split evenly between district designated funds and World Fund. So for a $100 donation, $5 comes out for operations and $250 comes out from each side, district designated funds and World Funds. If you look at Charity Navigator, that Lexi Crawford will be talking about later this afternoon during the TRF chair presentation, this is still some of the lowest, if not the lowest, operating expenses of any foundation in the Charity Navigator system. Okay, Lee? So this was a bit confusing to me, so I actually called the Rotary Foundation and talked to our representative, Renee Reiling, and asked her how this was going to operate. Because when we make, starting in 25, 26, if we have any of our DDF left over on the global grant side, it would go away. The Rotary Foundation would reabsorb it and put it on the World Fund side. However, the foundation is able to track when our donations are made and when our DDF is given to us. And they will always take the oldest DDF first to fund a global grant. So we feel that we have enough global grants, and by doubling the club cash amount, we will not have to worry about any of our DDF being eliminated. If we do have any DDF left over, next slide, please. Then after 5 years, we don't have to give it to the World Fund. We could, but we could also give it to an area of focus, a disaster response, the Endowment Fund, Polio Plus, or Rotary Peace Centers. So it's not like our donations would not go to a Rotary purpose. And I believe that this is a really good change to encourage those districts around the world that are hoarding funds to get those funds back out and working in the world like our donations are supposed to. Okay. So Rotary Foundation has sent this chart out to explain the impact of those changes. And it appears that those changes will increase about $21 million. This PowerPoint is on the district website. And if you want to study this further, you're welcome to, or if you have any questions, I'm not going to dwell a long time on this. Next, please. So Lee, do we have any questions at this point?
You do, Tim. You talked about one of the changes from the 100% match down to 80% match. And at the district level, the decision was made that the DDF would move to 2 to 1. Would you
Yes.
also address, is there a new maximum DDF per grant?
30,000.
Thank you.
We raised that from 25 to 30. So the other thing that I wanted to mention is the endowment fund. Not only are we encouraging people to take a look at their annual fund contributions and make sure they're up to snuff, but also if you can increase that, would be great. Leanne and I do that through Rotary Direct. However, I also want to mention the endowment fund, and for people not to forget about the endowment fund. We can endow to the annual fund. It's called the share fund. If you go in and do that, and at 11 or noon, Win Spiller will be talking about the endowment fund. And our district reaps the benefits of the interest earned once those dollars are realized upon the demise of the donor. You can also actually make cash donations to the endowment fund. But right now we're reaping about $30,000 in interest for our district designated funds from the endowment. So that's something not to forget, to leave some money in your will or trust, and you won't miss it. And I'm sure your kids won't care. And that will really help out the annual fund. Okay, next slide. So, what can you do? We can celebrate the success of our global grants. And at our quarterly grants meeting, we try to do that each time, talk about the things that we're doing in the world and the difference that it's making. You can do that in your own community. That's an awesome way to recruit new members, is to tell stories about the wonderful work that you're doing. We are currently using our district designated funds pretty well. We're using up all of our district grant designated funds every year. We've been asking people to think about and increase their annual fund contributions, and then create your own legacy with a gift to the endowment. Next slide, please. So I mentioned this earlier, that we increased the DDF match 2-to-1. And as I said earlier, we increased the single grant match to $30,000. Okay. So I want to talk a little bit, and I'm looking for some help from those people that have written grants. Once I kind of go through these keys to successful grants, then I'd like you to put in the chat box a key that has really helped you write a successful grant, and then Leanne will call those out as they come in. So let me share some of the things that I think are really important to writing a successful global grant. Next slide, please. So global grants can seem overwhelming. And if you don't go about it in a methodical process, it can turn into a quagmire of emails. Believe me, I've seen them and been involved in them. So what I'd like to do is kind of reduce what I think are the keys to successful global grants first, and then we'll have some of our experienced global grant writers weigh in on that. Okay, next slide. So the first thing is to become knowledgeable about global grants. The worst thing you can do when you attempt to write a global grant is just to go to the global grant, to the Rotary website, go to a global grant, pull up an application and start writing. You always have to start with the end in mind. And so it's really important. They're on the global, on the Rotary.org website. When you log into My Rotary and you go to the grants website, you can find all these resources. The terms and conditions for the Rotary Foundation grants. These are important not only for global grants, but also for district grants. Understanding exactly what you can do for grants and what you cannot do. You can also go to our district policies and procedures and understand how you present a grant for approval of DDF. It's really important that you follow that process. If you have an application, it's important that you turn in the rough draft of that application to our Global Grants Chair, who currently is Ralph Christensen, and Leanne, our grant subcommittee chair, so they can review that before the grants meeting, and they will give you hints and tips on how to get your DDF approved. There's also a guide to global grants. Understanding that is really important. Understanding what sustainability is and understanding how you're going to get sustainability from the grant you want to write. Understanding community assessments and how that works and what tools you need. And a lot of people say, well, how do I get a community assessment? I don't even know how to connect. I'm going to talk about Rotary action groups in a little while. And if you don't have any experience with district or with global grants, contacting the Rotary action group in the area that you want to work, they have communities who are in need and who have already completed assessments. So you don't even have to create that. You can just hop on the Rotary action group train and they will help you work with a club in that area. Also, there is a global grant monitoring and evaluation plan. That is critical. That is critical that you understand that this grant has to be evaluated and it has to be monitored over time. Global grants usually take from 3 to 7 years to complete and finalize. And you have to have a really good partner. I'm going to talk a little bit about that. And then look at the global grant report template to understand what you're going to have to report out and how that report needs to take place. If you understand all that before you even start writing, then you will be miles ahead of having an easier journey. Any questions, Lee?
Tim, we do, actually not a question, but just an affirmation that going through these steps that you've mentioned are really going to serve well in the end as the application goes through review by the foundation. And I was actually in the process of typing in a note as well. We have wonderful resources in our own district where our own members have had experiences doing clean water, doing disease prevention, working in the areas of maternal and child health. So through the district foundation committee, you can reach out and say, I'm thinking about doing a clean water project. Who's done one of those? Or in addition to that, you can also find out who's worked on any grant in a country where the project will be taking place. So you can maybe learn some of the ins and outs of that. So we've got some of our own great resources right here. I do have a question here, Tim. Is the report template the same for interim reports as for final reports on a global grant?
That's a good question, and I don't have the answer for that right off the top of my head. They're very similar. Leanne might be able to speak to that, or another one of our persons who are on here who have written grants, who have written interim and final reports. I think the difference is on a final report is you're just basically closing out the budget and giving the, making sure that all the money's been spent appropriately. But essentially, I believe they're pretty close to the same.
So Julie has affirmed that as well. So Tim, going back, kind of stepping away for a moment before I lose it, back to the template that you put up, and you even commented that you had to speak with Renee Reiling about the complexity of how they tag and monitor the 5-year cycle of the DDF before it rotates off. I think the first year was in 25, 26. And the question was put forward, when does the time start? Because our members know that when I donate, that money is held, when I donate to the annual fund, that money is held for 3 years before half of it comes back to the district as DDF. So does it start the day I make the donation, or does it start in the year that the DDF is available?
It starts the year that the DDF is available.
Thank you.
So it starts in 21, 22. So that's the DDF we receive in 21, 22, which was donated actually 3 years before.
That's it for now.
Okay, next slide. So once you've got the above list that I just showed you taken care of, There are two other documents that I believe are critical. One is called the Area of Focus Policy Statements. And so those are specific to each area of focus, and they will give you some really good pointers as to what you can do in your grant in that area of focus to make sure you're hitting on the target for the area of focus. And then the second document, which is found under the global grants link in the My Rotary, are called guidelines. And these guidelines are what the Rotary Foundation used to evaluate your grant. So after you've written your grant, if you download the guidelines for your area of focus, you can self-evaluate before you even send it in. That is something that was just added last year or the year before that has made a huge difference for many people. Okay, Lee? So where can you go for help? There's something called the Cadre of Technical Advisors. And these are experts in the area of global grants from around the world. Now, there's basically two levels of Cadre of Technical Advisors. There's the supervisors, is that what they call them? Lee, do you remember?
They're actually called coordinators.
The coordinators, the Cadre of Technical Advisors coordinators. They're the ones that really have the knowledge that you need. And if you're trying to contact one of those people and you can't find it on the Rotary website, contact Leanne or myself and we'll help connect you with the correct person. The next person is the grant officer for your grant. If you're not sure who that is, you can contact Renee Reiling and I can give you that information. She is our district's contact, and she will actually review your grant or have someone review your grant before you formally submit it to give you feedback. And I highly recommend you do that. So get that feedback before you submit it, then you won't get caught up in the game of emails back and forth. Now, let me mention something that's come up in the past before I move on. People have said, why can't I get a copy of a successful Rotary grant? Because they're not available for the most part. And the reason you can't do that is because once your grant is submitted, those emails that go back and forth between your club and Rotary Foundation are considered confidential. And so many times successful grant applications have emails that go back a number of times before the grant is rewritten in a successful format. And those records are considered confidential. We've tried and tried, and that's the answer that we get. The other really important group to get in contact with is the Rotary Action Groups, or they're called RAGs. These action groups are available on Rotary International website. If you log into My Rotary and you go to search feature and you put in Rotary Action Groups, a page will come up that has all the action groups with links to the action groups. So if you want to do something in child and maternal health and something specifically a focus that you want to do within that, there's probably an action group that does that. And you can contact them and they will help you not only find a club that needs that in the world or an area that needs it, but also help you with your grant. It's amazing. The next area is the District Rotary Foundation Committee and the chair, which is me. That's what the DRFCC stands for. The Grants Subcommittee Chair, which is Leanne, and the Global Grants Chair. And if we know that you're writing a grant in a specific area and we know somebody in our district who has been successful in writing grants in that area, then we will attempt to connect you with that person.
And Tim, would you mention the Global Grants Chair's name, please?
I thought I said Ralph Christensen. Sorry. So the fourth key is to have a strong and reliable host club. It's not hard to find a Rotary club that says, yeah, we'll help you with a grant and take your money. But that's not what you want. You want a successful grant project. And having a strong and reliable host club is really important. Have somebody who is going to answer your emails or talk with you on Zoom, whatever it takes to get grant projects completed. That's the kind of partner that you need. Also, another strong key is to have a strong and reliable partner or cooperating organization. Now, the Rotary has a list of approved cooperating organizations, and you can contact Renee Reiling to find out if the area that you want to write your grant in has Peace Corps or World, what is it? World
Vision.
World Vision. Yeah, there's a number of organizations out there that have cooperated and work closely with Rotary to do projects. Okay. And I've mentioned this, but I wanted to mention it again. Have your Rotary Foundation grant officer, Renee Reiling, review your grant before you submit it, or she'll have somebody look at it for you. Okay. So before we start talking about the website, what I'd like is if there's anybody who has written grants, been involved in global grants that has a tip that they think was really helpful to them, or they think would really be helpful to someone else, to please put that in the chat box.
And while we're waiting for some of those comments to come in, I do have one suggestion. Would it be possible for the District Foundation Committee to possibly put some samples global grants together? You know, they've been actually successfully submitted, reviewed, and completed without all of the emails, but at least there's a template there that would be a great resource for clubs who are writing a global grant. And I think, you know, that's a great idea, and we should put the look at that, and maybe Ralph and I can see what we can develop in order to have.
Yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah, have some samples posted.
While we're waiting for ideas, if you go to the Rotary website, and we'll come back to the chat box. I see some coming in now. First thing you do is you log into My Rotary. You go to the Rotary Foundation tab, hover over that. And then most of the resources that I mentioned earlier are in the Grant Center. And you get this drop-down menu. Lee, if you could click on it again, we'll get another finger. By going to the Apply for Grants, that's where the district grants, global grants, programs of scale, and the Grant Center open up. Most of those resources can be found in the Grant Center, but the guidelines are found under global grants. So I don't know why they separated those out into a separate place, but they are. So that's just something to remember. So let's go to some of those comments, Lee, that I saw coming in.
Mm-hmm. Well, somebody's again just agreeing and reaffirming that having a strong host club in the country where the project is taking place is really, really critical to the success of the grant. And I mean, through personal experience, add to that, many of these global grants are very robust and large enough in stature and what their objectives are that they're going to take several years to complete. So that just underscores the importance of having that relationship there. And one way to do that is to write a district grant so that could be part of the community assessment, as well as our grant, excuse me, our policies allow for international travel to be used, so that you are doing it face-to-face and not just over the internet, you know, via Skype or something. Your president-elect obviously attends training every year, which includes our neighbors and our sister clubs in Canada. So those would be international clubs. That's a great way to find a partner, particularly if you want to do a reverse grant here, as well as what we mentioned earlier is just talking to some of your fellow Rotarians about their experiences.
What's a reverse grant?
Do you want to handle that?
So they're not technically called reverse grants, but there have been a number of clubs on the West Coast who have wanted to do large projects that were too large for a district grant. So they have partnered with a club outside of our country. Canada or Japan or Brazil have large sums of DDF to do a global grant in this country. So it would be reversed. The club in our district would not be the international grant partner, they would be the host partner. And then the other club would be the international partner. A good example of this was a grant written down in the Sacramento area by Bob Deering for human trafficking. And what they did, he wrote a grant that I think it was around $50,000. I think it might have been even more that occurred in his district and what they did with that.
Oh, Tim, just because some people may know that it was about $350,000 project.
Oh, okay. Shows how my memory works.
Yeah, Tim, I don't
Okay.
have my phone with me, and since I'm sharing the slides, I'm not able to get to the contacts. Would you put Renee's email into the chat box for people so that they can add that to their contacts, and when they're ready, they could communicate with her?
Happy to.
Thank you. And then Tim, in your presentation, are you going to be talking more specifically about some of the terms and conditions around handling of cash and the requirement for a separate account?
Yes. So let me put this phone number in. So Renee's phone number is in the chat box.
Thank you. Do you have her email as well, or will we have to send that out a little bit later?
It's simply renee.riling@rotary.org.
Thank you.
Separate bank account. So most of you know that to do a grant, you have to have a separate bank account. For global grants, that account has to be separate for each global grant. And the grant number needs to be in the account name. That's pretty straightforward. Any funds that are spent out of that account need to come from either a debit card or a check or some other traceable means of tracking those dollars. Some of you also know that in a global grant, that if you allow the Rotary Foundation to handle the money for the grant, there's a charge for that. If your club wants to handle those funds, there's no charge for that. So if you have more specific questions about how that works, I would encourage you to contact Leanne or myself, and we can review that with you. Any other comments or chats, Lee?
No, not at this time.
Okay, next slide. So here's a link, and again, this PowerPoint is on the district website. I sent out a link with earlier, and this will take you right to those Rotary action groups. Okay. So that's it. I'm up for any questions that you have or thoughts or ideas.
Go ahead and unmute yourself if you have a question, or use your electronic hand and I will call on you and then we'll unmute you.
I also shared that if there's anyone who wants to stay for a minute, I would go to the Rotary website and demonstrate how to get to the Learning Center. If anybody's interested in that, put it in the chat box or raise your hand as well.
So just I think there were some important pieces that came out in your presentation, Tim. So would you remind the group where to find the link to the grant management seminar that is required?
Sure.
And then
In
we
order to
also,
get to the,
I'm
let me
sorry.
just, to get to the Learning Center, it's on the Rotary International website. I could send you a link. The problem with that is you have to log into my Rotary, and that breaks up the link. So if you go to my Rotary, Lee, can you put the slide back up and go back to that second to the last slide that had a picture of the district of my Rotary website? There. So if you go to the tab that says Learning and Reference and hover over that tab, it will get a drop-down menu. And in that drop-down menu is the Learning Center. If you click on the Learning Center, it will take you to a page that has a bunch of multicolored rectangles. The Rotary Foundation is the pink rectangle. If you click on that, then the Learning Center programs that are under the Rotary Foundation will show up, and you just pick Grant Management Seminar. So you go to Learning and Reference, Learning Center, Rotary Foundation, and then Grant Management Seminar. And if anybody wants the specific path again, just drop me an email and I'll send you the path. I think that's it, Lee.
All right,
Unless
thanks,
you have more
Tim.
questions.
Nope, we do not have any more questions. Let me stop my.
So I want to thank everyone for your time and energy, for supporting the Rotary Foundation and making a difference in the world. Without you, it doesn't happen. Thank you.